kids, section 10.4 in your Math Links 8 textbook. It is our last section in our solving algebraic equations. And this section has to do with distributive property. As we talked about before, distributive property is multiplying an algebraic expression, at least at a grade 8 level, multiplying an algebraic expression by a number, whether it be 2 or 3 or -5, and understanding what that would look like or what that would become. So this first question says solve each equation modeled by the diagram. So if we think about what this says, before you learned about distributive property, you would have said this is 2x minus 6 equals 6. Right? Because you would see 2 x's and you would see a -6 constant, and you'd say it's equal to 6. That's what you would say. But if I think about this side of my equation, I have, I have this group right here, and I have an identical group of it right here. So I have two of those groups, and each of those groups is an x minus 3, right? I have an x minus 3 here, and I have an x minus 3 here. So really what I can say is I have two groups of, or multiply x minus 3 by 2. So, actually, I just pressed pause a second ago, so I'm not 100% sure where I am. So we could say two groups of, so two groups of this multiplication, which is what this is doing, x minus 3. So essentially what we're saying is we have two x's and we have two 3's. We use these things called distribution arrows to remind ourselves that whatever's in the bracket, we're multiplying each of those parts by the number. Okay? So both of those are the same. And if I was to solve this equation, I would put 6 on this side. I would put 6 on this side. Create 0 pairs. And if 2 x's is equal to 12 of these, and if 2 x's is equal to 12, and therefore each of those x's must be worth 6. Our solution would be 4x is equal to 6. In the second question, if I looked at it from my elementary style algebra, like grade 7 days, I would say this is 3x minus 6 equals, or sorry, minus 6 equals 9. But if I'm looking at it with new ideas of distributive property, I have one group, two groups, I have 3 groups of this s minus 2. So I have 3 groups of s minus 2 is equal to 9. Right? So if we solve that, since 3s is 8x, 3 times -2 is -6. So if I ask you the question, in this equation right here, what is the constant? I'll ask this for class right now. What is the constant in this equation? It is -6. A lot of people won't say -6 because there's not even a -6 up there, is it? Right? You see a -2. A lot of people will misrepresent the constant in this equation as -2. But it's not -2 because there are 3 of them. Right? There are 3 of those -2's as the constant, which means there are 3 s's. And there are 3 -2's, which is -6. So, as Lincoln said, the constant in that equation is actually -6. If I solve it, I would add 6 to both sides. I get 3s equals 15. And therefore, s is equal to. Question 5, we're going to do the same thing again, except I'm just going to solve it by reinterpreting it. I know that 8 is equal to. Instead of saying 4x minus 8, I'm going to say 4 groups of this amount right here. It's 4 of those groups that I just circled. Right? Now, if I reinterpret that, that would be 8 is equal to 4x minus 8. Add it to both sides. 4x will equal 16. Divided by our coefficient, x will equal 4. So that means each of these is worth 4. 16 and -8. 16 and -8. Question B. We have -6 is equal to 2 groups of x plus 4. Now we can clearly see the 2 groups of x plus 4 is -6 is equal to 2x right here plus 8. We would have achieved that without the picture. We multiply each of those parts in the bracket. Subtract 8 from both sides. Get rid of the constant. 2x equals negative 14. Divided is moved by 2. X equals. Any questions on those two diagrams? Question 6 answers the model to solve, so we will model this time. So on your test, it says you have to understand that says 3 groups of t minus 2. So when I draw t minus 2, I'm going to draw it one time. And then because I have a smartboard, I'm going to clone it not twice, 3 times. That's 3 groups of t minus 2. Is equal to, so when I draw my scale, is equal to negative or positive 12. And here's where it gets tricky. I'm going to draw 12 like this. Tell me why. Why did I draw my 12 like that? I want them in even groups because if you think about this equation, 2 methods that we learned to solve it is I could expand it to become 3t minus 6 equals 12. But the other way we learned we could solve it is to do what to both sides? Divide by 3. So instead of having 3 groups of t minus 2, by dividing by 3, I would have 1 group of t minus 2 equals 4. Right? That was how we learned one of our methods for solving these first. And in my modeling, I can divide by 3 by doing this. Right? By dividing all 3 sides into 3 different scales, I end up with t minus 2 is equal to 4. And then when I solve it, I would add 2 to both sides. And the solution is going to be t. Over here, I have j minus 1. I have 6 of those. I can infinite clone it, double it, triple it, quadruple it, triple it, whatever 6 times is. There. That's 6 groups of j minus 1 is equal to negative 6, so I'm going to make a negative 1 on each of these. Now, obviously, if I was to have expanded distributive property, we would end up with 6j minus 6, right? That's what I would end up with. What we have right here, 6j minus 6 is equal to negative 1. If I divide both sides by 6 instead, I have 1 group of j minus 1 is equal to negative 1. You see that dividing the picture 6 groups and adding 1 to both sides will then tell me that j is equal to. Question 8, solve each equation, check your answer. I'm just going to do 2 of them. I'm going to do B and B. So I'm going to do B. I'm going to do question B and I'm going to do question B. Now, question B, I'm going to use division first. So instead of saying 4 groups of n minus 3, if I divide both sides by 4, I'm going to get 1 group of n minus 3. That's the solution. And I would add 3 to both sides. My final solution is 4 equals 6. That's the answer. Now, just to show you what students do wrong, some students consider the constant to be minus 3. And typically, if you said this in question B, if you said the constant is minus 3, what would you normally do to get rid of a constant minus 3? You would add 3. So some students try doing this. But the problem is 4n equals 15 is not true, right? Because minus 3 is not the constant, it's minus 12. So you can't do that. You have to first expand and then get rid of your constant. In question D, let's do it this way. Your constant is not 13. Your constant is 16 plus 18, 78. Because 6 times 13 is 78. Once we got it to here, let's subtract 78 on both sides. 6f equals, what's that going to be? 42? Negative 42? And divide both sides by the coefficient. Oh, line f will equal, how many 6 and 42 is 7? A positive 7 or a negative 7? Negative. Negative. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7 Question 9, we'll just do a couple of them too. I'm just going to do questions, I think it'll be B and D again. So, with question B, hang on just one second. So question B, this time our variable is on the right-hand side. So we don't have 14 groups of n minus 11. We actually have this idea of negative, that's not right. Negative 14 groups of n minus 11. So the only difference that this is going to be is when we do a multiplication, we have either integer or sign rules. So 42 is going to equal, I'm going to multiply both terms and negative 11 by the number negative 14. So 42 is equal to negative 14n. And negative 14 times negative 11 is positive 154. So notice how that positive symbol, the negative, multiplied by negative, became my addition sign in my actual solution. So positive 154. Subtract 154 from both sides now because that's your constant. Negative 14n equals negative 108, 12, right? 112, all right? Divide both sides by your negative 14 coefficient. And n will equal whatever 112 divided by 14 is. Negative divided by negative. Question D, this time instead of using expansion, if I have negative 5 roots of w plus 13, if I divide the entire side by negative 5 and divide this entire side by negative 5, we're going to keep this equal. And instead of having negative 5 roots, I'm going to have 1 root of w plus 13. Negative 10 divided by negative 5 is 2. Now we have a much easier question, something from grade 7. Subtract 13 from both sides. W. Question 10 appears on your test, and it asks you to show whether x equals negative 4 is the solution. Now here's the deal. I'm going to do A and B, each in a different way. I'm going to do A using substitution and simplification, and I'm going to do B by actually solving for x and seeing if it is negative 4. So two ways you can do it. So in the first part here, if I take this expression and I bring it over here, and I substitute the x for negative 4. So instead of saying x minus 1, I'm going to say negative 4 minus 1. Okay? So negative 8 times x minus 1, I'm going to change the x to negative 4. Do my brackets first, negative 4, take away 1 is negative 5. And negative 8 times the negative 5 is positive 40. Now since positive 40 does not equal 24, I can say that no, x does not equal negative 4. X does not equal negative 4. Otherwise, if we did, that side would have simplified it. So that's the first way you can solve it, just by substituting and simplifying. The second way, we'll do with B, is you can actually just take the equation, ignore everything about it, and just solve it. So I'm going to take 3 minus 8 minus x, which is negative 24. I'm going to expand maybe using distributive property. So negative 24 minus 3x equals negative 24. I'm going to add 24 to both sides. Negative 3x equals 0. Divide by 3 over 1, we already know the answer. X is equal to 0. So does x equal negative 4? No, x equals 0. So I say no, x actually equals 0. No, it's not negative 4. So once you've done it both ways, your choice now is to determine which way you prefer. Do you prefer substitution or do you prefer simplifying and just vary either answer? So for D, or C, excuse me, I'll use one method again, substitute. So take my negative 5 bracket x minus 1. I'll change my x to negative 4. Negative 5, well, negative 4 take away 1 is negative 5. Negative 5 multiplied by negative 5 is positive 25, which is what it says it should be. So therefore, yes, x does equal -4 because when I substitute both sides. Fine. Finally, your last one. I'm going to use distributive property to solve for it. And divide both sides by 6. So instead of saying 6 groups of x plus 7, 1 group of x plus 7 equals 11. Subtract 7 from both sides. X will equal 4. Is x equal to 4? Oh no, it was so close, it's -4. So you say no, x does not equal -4. X does equal 5. This is close, but no. Question 11 appears on your test, so be ready for it because it is something that's on your test. Question 11 is on your test. It says the fence around Giselle's new tree is in the shape of an equilateral triangle. So an equilateral triangle, just so you know, is 3 sides where all 3 sides are the exact same. We use those little lines to indicate the same. So when you think about her old fence, it was an equilateral triangle. And we represented all of the lengths would have been a number. I don't know what the old fence was, but it's x, x, x. We're going to represent it with variable x. Actually, I'm making a mistake. It can't be x. It has to be s. The only reason I don't like using s is because it looks like 5. I'll make it curly. Okay. So that's the old fence. It was a side length, and then all 3 sides are the same. So whatever number it was, we're going to represent it with s. But the new fence, the old fence is smaller. The new fence is going to be bigger. And it says here in our instructions, we're going to increase the length of the old fence by 7 centimeters. So if the old length is s, then the new length is going to be s plus 7. That's the new fence. And on your test, you need to have this drawing done. And you can see that you can take question and interpret it as a drawing to start. Okay? So the perimeter is all 3 sides added up, right? Or if this was a 5, and this was a 5, and this was a 5, it would be 3 sides of 5, which is 3 times 5. So since we have an algebraic expression s plus 7, 3 sides of s plus 7 equals the perimeter. In this case, we tell us the perimeter is 183. So all 3 of those sides, s plus 7, s plus 7, and 4, and then we say 3 times s plus 7 will equal 183. We can solve either way. I know we all like to do this division first. We'll divide both sides by 3. And we're going to get 1 group of s plus 7 equal to 61. 383 divided by 183 divided by 3. So if we have that, we're going to add 7, subtract 7. Both sides, s will equal 54. So now that we know s is equal to 54, so determine the length of each side of the fence, of the old fence. So if s is equal to 54, each of these sides, the old fence, 54 centimeters. And your last question does appear in your test as well. I'll just give you a heads up, something like this does appear. And it says, the amount of food energy per day required by hikers is multiplied by the equation T equals -125 bracket, or multiplied by T minus 122. And for all of you, this is the first time you've seen complicated equations like this. But what I recommend you do is take a highlight. The first thing I want you to do is define E. So I'm going to highlight E in my equation. And I'm going to highlight this part in the same color. That E in my equation represents the amount of food energy. And I'm going to take a different color highlighter, and in my equation I'm going to highlight T. And T is the outside temperature. Okay? So what I'm doing is I'm making sure I understand what this equation right up here, circle it, what this equation, or what this formula represents. And that's what it is. So now that I have that highlighted, it's going to make my next job much easier. If the outside temperature, hold on, outside temperature, what color did I use for outside temperature? Green. So if the outside temperature is 20 degrees, negative 20 degrees, how much food energy is required? So because I've now used that, if I take my formula, now know I have to substitute for T, so I'm going to have T equals negative 125 bracket, negative 20 is my temperature. So all I've done is I've changed this part right here for the part it told me it was, which is negative 120, temperature, T. And all I'm going to do, I don't do any algebra, I just have to do that. I have to solve this to figure out what is that E value. So E will equal negative 125 multiplied by negative 120, take away 122 is negative 142. Now, obviously, I'm going to have a hard time multiplying negative 125 by negative 142. What do I know about my answer for sure? It's going to be negative multiplied by. It's going to be a positive. So I know it's going to be positive, so I can forget about the negative sign. Use 125 multiplied by 142. That's going to come to 17,750. So therefore, answer A, therefore, energy needed is 17,750. And what units of energy do we have? Just so you know, 1 kilojoule or 4.5 calories. 1 kilojoule. So divide that by, I think, like roughly 4.5 to 5 kilocalories. B. If a hiker consumes this much energy, so now I'm going to grab my, yellow is my energy, right? Energy. So this many kilojoules of food energy. What's the temperature outside? So this time, I know this number over here is 19,000. I'm going to substitute my E for 19,000. I'm going to write the rest of my formula. Okay. So this time I'm given the yellow, and you solve for green. You know what? I'm going to expand this time. Negative 125. So the part first. I'm going to multiply the next part. Negative 125 times 122. That was positive. So 125 times 122. 15,250. And I'm going to subtract that from both sides. Negative 125. 125T. 3,750. Positive 3,750. Now I'm going to divide both by the coefficient to n. I mean 125 rather in that many, that should be 8, 24, 30. So if I take that and go division, 3750 divided by 125 equals 30. Is that a positive 30 or negative 30? Negative, because it's opposite sides. So therefore, the outdoor temperature, outside temperature, is negative 30 degrees